morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So here we are again on the Sunday morning at Unity of Springfield. The 14th of December. I can't even believe it. We're getting ready to close out 2025. So this morning I just thought we would continue on with our, we had such a great conversation last time around Advent and the meaning of words within Unity and within Advent season. And so a reminder that for Unity, Advent represents inner preparation rather than waiting for an external event to happen. And that our co-founder Charles Fillmore taught that biblical events represent states of consciousness, and Advent symbolizes the soul's readiness to recognize spiritual truth. Often referenced, if we want to look at some scripture, is Isaiah 40, chapter 3, prepare the way of the Lord. And our Unity metaphysical interpretation of that is that preparing the way means that we are clearing out limiting beliefs, we're releasing fear, we are minimizing distraction, and we're allowing our divine qualities like joy to freely express. And joy is this week of Advent, that is joy. And as I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, well, what makes Advent joy different than any joy, and what is the significance of that? And so I was reading something, and it termed it as deep spiritual joy. And so then I started thinking, well, is there a difference between what we would call regular joy and deep spiritual joy, and what exactly does that mean? And so that kind of took me down the path of looking at some different things. And so one of the things they said it was joy is naturally emerges when the inner way is prepared. And so looking at Advent, the discussion was that Advent joy isn't just about seasonal cheer. Like seasonal cheer, happiness, those are something akin to the joy, or it can accompany deep spiritual joy. But that deep spiritual joy is really about the spiritual remembering. And so joy is the soul's response to remembering our oneness with God. And that one difference that was noted is that even in uncertain times, joy can remain steady and present. So joy is the gladness of spirit, the deep inner assurance that all is well. And as we've talked about other things recently, joy can be covered up by fear, worry, false identity, but it's never destroyed. And so then I thought it would be interesting for us to have the conversation around how do we see happiness and spiritual joy as two different things. And so when we're talking in metaphysical terms and thinking about happiness, happiness is generally linked to external circumstances. So those are the things going on around us, the achievements we're making, the relationships we have, sensory input that we find pleasurable. And it can rise and fall based on what's happening around us. So when I was looking at happiness, some of the things that were said is like happiness is often reactive, or it fluctuates with the outside conditions. It depends on outcomes that may or may not be in our control. And that in a metaphysical view, happiness arises from the personality level of consciousness, which is looking at life through our senses and emotional reactions. Yeah, John.
Yep.
Oh, Jerry, are you going to grab it? Thank you.
That's all right. It's not that.
Sure, it's important. Yeah, it is.
The people online can't hear you. They're important. They need to know that.
What
I've noticed is that what we see most of it Christmas time is merriment, and it's it's kind of a frothy thing that depends on what you get for Christmas. And did I reciprocate that gift or something very superficial? And it has nothing to do with joy, and it should be separated in our conversation.
Yeah.
So I told people have told before about getting Abraham teachings and studying them, and then having that moment where there was just clarity, and that moment of joy has never left since then. That was about 92, and that moment of joy. I have had times where I'm not sure I want to stay here in this physical body, but that moment of joy has never left me. And the funny thing was, I was in the psychiatric hospital at one time, and we had classes in there you had to go to, and one of the classes was never stop seeking happiness and joy. That's always going to mess you up. It's always going to be the worst thing, because you'll always end up just back, in despair again. And I thought about that. So no, it's not a worldly perception.
Interesting. Yeah, and so I think like one of the things you said made me think, Don, you saying merriment. Like that was one of when I was looking at differences between happiness and joy. That was one of the things that was in something I read, that we often, like when we think of the word joy, there's a lot of times we put this kind of, like joy is loud and boisterous, like joyful, make a joyful noise, like all those things. But that in reality, joy can be very quiet and very calm, because joy, deep spiritual joy, is the awareness and the recognition of that connection and that feeling that no matter what is going on, all is well. And so you can be feeling that centeredness of deep spiritual joy in the middle of a hurricane of life. But it might not look like, it doesn't necessarily, that deep spiritual joy doesn't come with, maybe big smiles and laughter and loud things. Like that's more the happiness side of things, that we're expressing emotional happiness. Yeah, John.
I sometimes associate it with the half smile.
Yeah. Like it's that smile that's just like the inner peace, the inner knowing connection. Yeah.
Sorry I'm late. Just finished an entry, but I'm not sure you're familiar with the movie Lost Horizons. It's a very famous movie, came out in 1990. It was written in about 1936, I believe. And it was very famous during the war, but it's really an interesting movie, and I think it parallels very much with what they're saying, in that this guy goes through his life and he's always around these other people with things that are not beyond that. And he sees a light, he sees something. And he ends up going to the Himalayas, and I think we eventually came up with the idea of Shangri-La. And he goes up to the mountain, and he has this, what we would call a mountaintop experience of pure joy. Not joy that people may try to seek here within what you think who you are, but this joy of seeing beyond that, and he had always had this feeling that he couldn't share with others because they didn't share the same thing he did, and he saw something beyond that. I mean, they wanted to marry this woman who was very wealthy, and he could have had a life of leisure she really wanted him to marry her, but he wouldn't do that. He ended up going to Europe and had a whole scene, but it's really amazing how he always found himself in a position that there was more to life and to who he was than where he was. And so he went to the Himalayas. He had this thing with Shangri-La. And I think that's how that whole vision of what that meant became so popular. Was he went to the mountaintop. He saw what was beyond that. And for him, that was the joy that he had been seeking all along, but hadn't experienced. And being able to do that was he had gone to the mountaintop and seen the other side. And I think that speaks well to what you're saying.
Nice. And was that The Last Horizon or The Lost?
Lost.
The Lost Horizon.
It's really
So
interesting.
it's a book and a movie?
Well,
Yes.
yeah, it is.
Yeah.
When it was, I tried to check it out at the local library, and Springfield being where it was, they didn't have it. I had to get a library loan through St. Louis, and they were able to get the book, and so, but yeah, Lost Horizons. I wish I could think of the title. I mean, the author, but it's a great book, and I think it speaks to what you're saying.
Okay. Awesome.
I experienced a moment of joy 2 days ago.
Okay.
I was sitting on the couch miserable because I'd been having this terrible knee pain. Terrible, worse than I had ever had it. And it was like blowing me away because that was the leg that I went to see the shaman with Beverly 10, 15 years ago, and he fixed it. And anyway, so my daughter went to Walmart and bought me one of those pull-on knee things. And she said, "I don't get it, Mom. Do you have any trouble about moving forward?" And with this move I'm making into her house, it was kind of like, I just lost it. I just cracked up. And the joy came from my daughter throwing it in my face that she had listened at some point.
Yeah, because that's
Yeah.
connection, right?
Yeah.
Like, it was a belief in the connection that our mind and body and spirit are all connected, and that you've shared enough about that she then went, oh wait,
Yeah, she got it.
yeah,
And then she threw it in my face, and it was like wonderful.
nice. So some of the things that I found about spiritual joy, that it arises from inner spiritual awareness. It's the recognition of our oneness with God and our identity as a spiritual being. Again, joy can be steady and enduring, can exist even amid challenge, and it flows from the alignment of truth. So any moment that we are in alignment with truth, we are sitting in joy. And I don't know, I just found this really meaningful to think through this difference of happiness and joy, because I think I've had moments where I was in this deep spiritual joy and then felt like maybe I wasn't, because it wasn't looking like happiness. And if I can kind of separate those two things, that sometimes, I don't know, I guess for me, sitting in deep spiritual joy, or being in my joy about something, it felt like there was an expectation that would look like big, boisterous happiness. And so it always felt like, well, maybe I'm not doing joy right, because I'm not, like, I don't have this big energy around it, but it's more of a peaceful joy. So this like really helped me think through, like, okay, well, there's like this difference between my emotional, human, egoic, or sensory kind of happiness and my inner being aligning with truth and just sitting in that can be a very calm and serene kind of joy. Yeah, John.
Dee Arman used to always tell me, it's when I reach my bliss, and he used the word bliss. To
Yeah.
me, is a very joyful that's not over the top.
Yeah, like sitting in your bliss, sitting in your spiritual joy. Yeah,
Very good.
very.
I look at it as a state of being. You just are. That makes any sense,
Yeah,
because it's nothing you acquire or nothing you accomplish. You just become complete. That makes,
yeah, but I don't know that. I think what was different for me is I think there's a lot of us and a lot of people in general that wouldn't define that. They wouldn't attach the word joy to that. They might say, that I'm at peace, I'm centered, I'm calm, those kind of things. But like really thinking through this idea through Advent that is pure joy when you are connected in that way, and however that feels is you being in that deep spiritual joy.
Well, when do you arrive and you get there, and when do you get? How can you get beyond where you are now? When I was teaching in Shufu at the birthplace of Confucius in the school that was founded by his descendants, and I was teaching there, and it's like, how can I go beyond this? When you talk about spiritual joy, and you think about the fact you're a teacher and you're teaching kids that are 18, 19, 20 years old about seeing beyond themselves. And what does that mean? Now, for kids that grow up in the countryside of Shandong province who lived under the umbrella of Confucius their entire lives, when they went to school every day, it was Confucius. It was this sense of virtue that they grew up with, and seeing beyond that. And then living in China, where there was a limitation like a glass ceiling to what they could become. But for them, that spirit of joy came with where they were from. The countryside gave them that. Being out with nature, they understood that. But teaching in that environment, it's like, wow, how do you go beyond this? How do you see when you're teaching these kids to see beyond that with the limitations that exist, and they all wanted to be teachers. They all wanted to be English teachers. That was their window to the world or whatever. It was an amazing experience, not only for them, but I think for me it was, in many ways, it was even more. Because when you experience joy, what can be the next step beyond that? Anyway.
Yeah.
I do believe this joy, this that we're talking about, is a joy beyond the physical world. But I hate to see us divorce the two. Make it either or. You got to have this. Be focused on a high spiritual idea, and you got to be, out of your ego, out of this human self. Just because I can tell you that long before I ever believed in any kind of spiritual thing, when I set up the WW wrestling ring in my living room and my kids and I played tag team wrestling, I was there. And it was beautiful. And there was nothing, I have not had a moment that is more joy and more a spiritual connection and a high spiritual knowing than than those moments. So just it's the same way I have been in places where people would have said, "Oh wow, she is such a happy person," and I was just trying to not kill myself in the next minute. It was so horrible. So
Yeah, and I think that's what for me, like you can have the two can go together. Like you can have your deep spiritual joy and be experiencing happiness. I think that was the difference for me, is thinking about that, like the happiness part is a little bit based on the conditions around you at the time. And if that circumstance changes, then that happiness increases or decreases. And the joy behind it, that deep spiritual joy behind it, is everlasting. And no matter what is going on, it can be present at the core of your being. And so, even, I don't know, do small things with great joy, that kind of thing. It doesn't mean you have to be bouncing around with a smile on your face and be like, oh, I'm so happy and I'm such a happy person and all that. You can be that. There can be times of that, but it can also just be that as I move through the world, I feel deeply connected, and therefore every action I'm taking is from a deeply connected place. And it's from a knowing that all is well and all is working for my highest and best good, and I'm sending out love, and all of those things are happening, but it doesn't always have to be this big bubbly bouncy thing, but it can be. It can always be. And so some other things that was in what I was reading, and so a difference is that happiness might ask, is my life going the way I want it to? Whereas joy asks, am I aligned with my spiritual truth in this now moment?
There's the difference.
So like the just subtle differences, or subtle but like really powerful. Yeah, Dawn, what do you have to say?
The thought has escaped me.
Okay.
I have.
It was a lie.
When I was a neighborhood specialist doing master planning and neighborhoods, one of the greatest difficulties that you find when people own property or that live in is seeing beyond themselves, seeing beyond the property line where they live, and showing them that there is something much bigger than themselves, who they think they are. Because in that neighborhood where you live, what you do has a real impact on the people around you. Do you have trash everywhere, or do you grow flowers? What kind of influence are you expressing as your own internal joy? And how do people transcend that to say, oh, I can do that. I can do that. And that was always the biggest challenge on doing it. In neighborhood planning, I did a lot of that for many years, was getting people to see beyond who they think they are. And showing them that joy is just waiting to be expressed. And that it's within them to find and then nurture and then move beyond themselves. Moving beyond yourself in joy in what we do. And I think nature provides that in many ways. As we either find ourselves either growing flowers or just whatever, we're driving down the road and seeing all the stuff we see in the fall with leaves and what, it's expressing the joy that is already present and finding a way to express that. Yeah. That is so difficult for some people.
That's a really good analogy for just one neighborhood planning. That's a really good, you could go really big with an analogy about neighborhood planning and what the oneness of us all and all the impacts. Yeah. Think of it, Dawn?
Yes, my thought came back.
Okay. Wonderful life.
The what really brings the joy to me is a focus on the fact that we are all eternal. Nothing can harm us. What more could we ask? These little things that happen to us are peripheral, are frothy, and will no longer be even remembered in the long run. And so to remember who we are and whose we are, is an automatic door opener for me into the world of joy.
Yeah, so one of the quotes I found, Emily Katie, we are joyful when our thinking is in harmony with spiritual law. Joy doesn't deny difficulty, it transcends it. Yeah, so that was nice. And then, so we talk about, like we're talking about Advent this month, and why does it matter? And so again, if we put this in context with joy, it's that we're not waiting for joy to arrive. It's not something that we eventually find, or that is out there, ever elusive, that we have to track down. It's that the joy is already present, that connection is already there. And so it's the preparation of our consciousness to remember that it is there at all times, and that we and here you go, Dawn, it's like you were reading my notes, because spiritual joy remembers that we are something eternal. Yeah, there it is right there. Whereas happiness is looking for something to happen. And I think, when you get into words and saying this is one and that's the other, our English language, we use words so synonymously and things. I think it was, like I said, it was just, it was meaningful for me to think through all of this stuff around happiness and joy, and realize that some of my most joyful moments, if someone was just watching, I don't know that they would have been like, oh, she's in her joy, because it's an internal thing, right? It's an internal process. And so happiness is that outward expression that people are more easily recognize. But when we are having a remembrance of the eternal truth within us, that looks a little
Tears of
more,
joy.
yeah, like that's where we, like, using the words bliss like that, but it's an internal process, so it may or may not look like something that someone else could identify from the outside. Yeah.
I think it's hard to define something to someone that they're going to have a feeling of. You can't tell somebody in words what you're feeling, because they're going to automatically put it into their own dictionary and come up with their own version of what you're saying.
Mhm.
And so technically, everybody's exactly where they need to be. I can't save anyone, and the only joy I can express is the one that I feel inside me. And I'm the only one that's going to know it. And so there's nothing that I can do, that there's no words that come out of my mouth that is going to invoke that kind of a feeling in someone unless they're ready for it. And then there's nothing I can say that will make them unready.
Everything, see, one more, just very quick, no, go ahead.
And take the opportunities to not just be silent in your joy. There's so many ones. I don't know how many times. One of the places I've told you that when I stand in a line, I wanted to not go into, oh, God, didn't go. So my internal dialogue is a place where I now stand. It's a very good place, and I share that. When I'm standing next to someone, it's like, do you know what an honor it is to stand next to you in this line? It is just so lovely to be here with you in this moment, or to be standing there and be willing to share. Someone say, I'm sorry I'm taking so long, and to go, the place where I now stand is a very good place, not afraid to look weird, and then have that person go, can I touch your face? And I'm like, can I touch your face? And we look into each other's eyes, and it's just a moment of pure love and joy. So don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to let people know you're weird. It's fun.
Oh, nice.
Well, to follow up what he was saying, there's a saying, everything we do touches others, and everything that others do touches us. We're not singular beings here having an experience. The reason why we're here is to live, in many ways, we live in paradox. That's the purpose. See things that don't fit. Why don't they fit? And how do I come out of that something better than I am now? And that's, to me, one of the definitions of joy. We all live in paradox because we all find ourselves in situations that maybe we wouldn't rather be in, but we are. And what does that mean? And I think that whole idea of the ultimate joy is learning from that and not repeating those things that made that happen. And it's that growth that we experience, that we evolve into, that ultimately takes us where we need to go.
Yeah, so I also have written that joy is a state of being, a soul level knowing that life is held in divine order. And so from Charles Fillmore, he said joy is the strength of the soul, which he was kind of echoing from Nehemiah 8:10, which is the joy of the Lord is your strength. And so our metaphysical interpretation of that is that joy strengthens the soul's capacity to trust, persevere, and love. It stabilizes our consciousness so we can respond wisely rather than react to the world. And that it doesn't eliminate emotion. So joy doesn't eliminate emotions, but it grounds them. And this was what, like, really thinking through this. So it says a person can feel sadness and still be rooted in joy in that moment. And at first I was like, what? And then I thought, oh, true. There have been absolute moments where I was feeling sadness, and at the same time, the joy of the spiritual truth that there is connectedness and I am a divine expression and all of those things. That's one of those times where the outward appearance, if someone looked at me, they wouldn't have been like, oh, she's sitting in her joy of the truth of who she is, because maybe I was crying or consoling someone or whatever. But those two, they can exist in the same moment. So, Jerry, John, and Elby with comments. Yeah.
Oh, it's okay.
I think that's where Lisa was last Sunday, because I talked to her and they had announced that she had sat with her dad as he passed. But yet, when I talked to her, she's like, well, I had peace because I knew. And she says, around me, they didn't understand, but I had that peace inside of me. And it was so neat. I was so glad that I had spoken to her, because I felt that connection that she had, that she knows. And sometimes you're in a situation where things are sad, but yet to have that and to have that, be able to have that peace ripple.
I just had this playful thought came into my mind. Dan was talking about paradox, and I just thought, well, the paradox of paradise. And then some dad joke things off of paradox and a paradise. And
Well, give us those. Oh, that's funny. So then we look through this Advent season. Of course, we're looking, at the scriptures around Advent. And so Luke 2:10, I bring you good tidings of great joy, and looking at the metaphysical interpretation of that. And so a metaphysical interpretation of that is that the angels are representations of divine inspiration, those things that just kind of poof into your awareness, that you may or may not be expecting, often not expecting, and maybe sound a little crazy. I talked about this last week that, you've got the shepherds in the story, the shepherds are out in the field and they're just ordinary shepherds doing their ordinary shepherd thing. And all of a sudden, poof, there's angels there, right? And they're, what is this? What are we hallucinating? You know, you can only imagine like this moment of what is going on here. And then these angels are saying, we bring you, you know, great tidings of joy, good tidings of great joy. This amazing thing is happening right now, and you can go be part of it. And so that's how divine inspiration sometimes or often comes to us, right? Is we're just driving down the road, or we're sitting in a quiet moment of meditation or something, and we have just this poof of divine inspiration that says, you know, if we did this, or you need to go this direction, or you need to go talk to this person, or you can't even imagine the goodness that's coming your way. Get ready, because here it comes, and you just have these feelings, and you're like, I don't really know what that. Sometimes we know exactly what it means. Sometimes we're sitting there going, I don't really know what this means, but okay, and we're like the shepherds, and we go along with it and say, if it's there, if I'm seeing it, if I'm hearing it, if I'm experiencing it, then it's for me and it's my good and it's from divine mind, and so I'm going to go along with it. Then we have, so that announcement and that and our willingness to listen is then that awakening awareness moment. And then the joy is the recognition again that it's coming from that place of goodness and that we can trust it. Yeah.
Yeah, when does myth become the reality in which we live? And a myth, when we think about historically what that means, other than memories and remembrances of making a connection to something beyond who we think we are, myth gives us the ability of seeing beyond that. We are part of something, maybe real, maybe not real, but we can identify with it, so that's who we are. So what, and I think Joseph Campbell did this very well. Speaking of bliss, the idea, where do we transcend myth? Where do we transcend the myth of the Christmas story and become who we are supposed to be? That is whatever reality is and whatever that means. And do we follow myth that makes us feel good, gives us joy, you know? And is that, do we define ourselves therefore within that myth? I think that's, anyway.
Yeah.
I have a follow-up thought from John's. No. I have a follow-up thought from John's comment on the paradox idea of paradise. When you think of it, the paradise is always envisioned in the future, something for which to be aimed at, something to be attained. But there is no future; it's all now. So if we're going to find paradise, it's right here, right now. And so it's a pipe dream, unless you can think about it being a reality right here, now.
Here. My daughter put me in paradise the other day.
Amen. Yeah, and so this is like this story that we talk about each year and that we revisit. It's not about a happy event in history. If we're looking at it through a metaphysical lens, it's about the birth of spiritual awareness in our soul and in the soul of every person around us, which then means that it's the birth of spiritual awareness in the collective soul, and that as each of us come more firmly into that spiritual awareness, we are building up the spiritual awareness for the collective.
Well, we are all not on the same spiritual path.
Yeah.
We each have the need to transcend who we are today. If you want to believe this is it, you're done and it's over, you can believe that. Or if you want to believe there's eternal spirit that's been around forever and you're a continuation of that, then you can believe that too. So it's whatever you want to believe within how you define that. If you it's one and done and you forget about it, you can do that. Or you don't have to believe that. You can believe your spirit is eternal and you're here for your spiritual growth. If you look from a Buddhist standpoint, where there's karma and everything else you can think of, but we are here just to transcend the humanness of our faults to become something greater in the future. And we're on a path. I know many times when you travel, again, I always go back to China, but you have these mountains that historically have been a real significance of religious growth and development, and primarily Buddhism and Taoism. But it's transcending yourself, going to the mountain, having that sense of identity with nature and the what you see, and being a part of that. We are a part of that. That's why the idea of one of 10,000 things is so prevalent in Eastern thought, in that it's not a one and done. All the way to heaven is heaven. And however many times that's a Christian mystic belief. But we are here for our soul's growth. So does that mean we're done when we die this time? We're done? I'm sorry. I don't believe that.
Right, but then we can acknowledge that there are some people who do, and that brings them great peace and joy, and so we are all whatever helps or whatever feels like heaven in the now moment to each individual is where they're at. And I like what you said, the way to heaven is heaven.
Right.
And so that like there goes to Dawn's now moment. Like it's okay to have goals or have a vision of where we would like to be, as long as we don't tie our feelings of joy or happiness to attaining to only the attainment of that moment in that moment. It's each step along the way, each moment along the way is its own moment of the now, and it is the heaven, the kingdom within us is in each and every moment, not just when we get to the top of the mountain. Yeah. Jerry, did you say something?
Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm starting to understand that I've never had an original thought. Even the Bible says there's nothing new under the sun. And that's thousands of years ago. And so what does that make me? That makes me an instrument for my soul. And so I have to use this instrument as a receiver. What I receive is what is probably going to direct me into where I go, because we all have our own original path. It's just our individuality, if we want to call it that. But it was really a freedom when I realized that I don't have a thought, so I don't have to think. Does that make sense? I don't know.
Yeah, well, and I think that's the whole idea of, like we were talking about, if you're in that joy of knowing the connectedness, and even the story of the angels coming and that whole idea of hearing this like crazy unexpected message in the middle of a field and going, okay, like that, I'm gonna trust this, I'm gonna believe this, and I'm gonna go, and I'm gonna follow through and go find this stable and find this manger and see what this is all about. That the more times we do that, the more times we trust as we deepen that sense of joy and the knowingness and the connectedness, then it becomes more and more commonplace for us to hear that bit of divine inspiration and say, yes, okay, let's go. And then that makes every now moment a moment of deep spiritual joy and or bliss or however you want to term it. Yeah, John.
Oh, okay. So that, the empty vessel meditation or metaphor to, to allow whatever isn't what we consider to be our own thoughts or our egoic thinking that allows that was one thing. And the other is that how if our focus is towards the present or towards the future or the past, that it creates kind of a barrier to that empty vessel contact with the divine mind.
Yeah.
My thinking.
All right. Any final thoughts on deep spiritual joy?
Only to what Jerry was saying as far as words is that having no original thought. It makes you wonder how we came across. How can you deal with?
They can't hear you.
There we go. So,
Trying to is when you think about copyright laws, and that there's no everything has already been said that needs to be said. Whatever that means, how can someone copyright words that has already been said 1,000 times? And how can you take ownership of words? How can you a transcendental thought that you put on paper, and then also ultimately you can copyright? Where did that come from? Did that come from you? Or did it come from up there somewhere that you just transmitted as an editor? You're editing words and thoughts that have already been present, and all of a sudden you're going to copyright that. Just like a lot of the things in Unity, particularly the 12 powers, that's purely a Taoist and Eastern thought that all came from that. So when someone decided to put that in English, copyright it, and put it in a book, or however we say it in Unity, where was the original thought that came from? Yeah. It wasn't here, it was somewhere else that we decided to make our own.
Yeah.
This is what is called the matrix, where everything is available always. All the knowledge we have in our higher self is all there is. It's a part of the divine nature of who we are. It's a thing we just have to, when we vibrate at a certain frequency, that's the idea. And it's available to all of us. If we could see what fills the space of the universe, it is that matrix that ties everything together. So we're transceivers, we're senders, and we're receivers at the same time.
Yeah, LB then John.
I just want to say, I've just read a set of books that were written in 34, but they were thought of in 1890s. And he talks about the culture in the East where they don't copyright, and I'm sure that they've come up to our Western ideas, but their masters didn't copyright. The yogi masters and the spiritual masters It was something that was downloaded from the cosmos, and it belonged to everybody.
Right.
The other thing I wanted to say was when I was in Israel, the guy I was with had been there like 10 times, so he kind of knew his way around. So we went to the scene where there's a star on the floor where the manger was supposed to have been, which is housed in the basement of a church. And then we went to where somebody decided, and actually where the manger probably was in a cave. So it was outside of Bethlehem, and there was a cave where the shepherds would come, and when the weather was bad, they would come into the cave, and it was a fairly good concave. But thinking about that, I mean, the whole tradition of Judaism had this, people were spoken to. And so there was a whole expectation of being able to communicate with the angels and spirit guides, what we would call today. And so it wasn't a real unusual thing for the shepherds to respond to that, particularly when they were out with nature and they were being guided. You get this intuition when you're out in nature that, there's probably maybe a wolf nearby today, so I need to corral my sheep. You go by your intuition, by your gut feelings, by your inspirations. And so it wasn't such a out of the picture thing that happened, because they had a history of that, of being spoken to as a people. And I think that,
Yes, I'm putting my
I think
2025 humanness into the story.
Yeah, well, I think that unity is an atmosphere that we begin. We had people come and say, I've spoken to your loved ones. I mean, we have that atmosphere in this community that I think is kind of bringing that back into focus, and I think that's a really good thing. So that was just my thought was, we shouldn't be shocked by downloads from spirit.
Yeah.
So,
And that's a joyful moment.
Yeah, very good. Another example of that is when you study indigenous spiritual practices worldwide, from out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean to Native American to South America to Africa to Asia to Australia. The similarities are striking. It's like what? So did this all got downloaded totally separately because they weren't in communication with each other.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah. I think I did one of our Sunday morning talks was on a book by Melissa Gilbert called Big Magic, and she talked about, and that was one of the things she talked about, especially with like creative works. And one of the examples she used, she said she believes that like all the creative ideas are like in divine mind, and they're just looking for a place to express, and that they might visit you, and if you're not ready to express it, then it may move on to the next person. And so she had an experience where I believe it was an idea for a book came to her, and in the moment that it came to her, she was like, man, I don't want to write that right now, or she was had another project going, or she was doing something else, and so she chose not to write it. And then a year later or months later or whatever, she was like, oh yeah, there was that one idea that was a pretty good idea, and she started to create an outline. And then she met with another person, another writer, and they start telling her about the book that they just finished. And it's the idea. And she's like, I wasn't ready for it when it came to me. It was desiring to be expressed, and it found somebody else who was ready to sit down and write it right then. And she talked about how many times she's bumped up, and sometimes people, if they're not in that spiritual connectedness mindset, they might think, well, you stole my idea, or I must have said something about that idea, and they took it and ran with it, and they wrote it instead of me, kind of thing. And she was like, no, I just really believe that like it's all out there and it's waiting to be expressed. And so if one person's not ready for the download, then somebody else will be, and it finds a path and finds the person who's maybe, if we tie it back to what we're talking about today, that's connected to that joy and ready to listen to that idea.
When I wrote my own version of the Dina Jing, it came to me in about a 3-week period. And it was like, where did that come from? I'd been studying Eastern thought for 7 or 8 years at that point, but the culmination of that I had been doing, boom. And so much, and then later that book was published in China, and people would ask me, where did that come from? You transmitted the ideas in a different way. And that many people thought needed to be heard. But even words that I would use, and we all do, where does that word come from? Where did I learn to use that word in a way I have never used before? And we all do that. Where do those words and our vocabulary come from that we may not have even used before? But we all do that. But where is that divine mind coming from that takes us, moves us along the path we're intended to follow? Whether we want to or not, it's there waiting for us to say, oh, I need to go there.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's important for us to look at it like through this Advent season, this awakening of spirit, because the more we are in tune and in touch and aware of all of these faculties of our spiritual being, the more receptive we are to those ideas that are coming and the things that are desiring to be expressed. So, what a beautiful conversation yet again. And if you don't know, or if you cannot see it in my expression, like these are moments of pure joy for me. Like I feel these moments of connection through conversations like this and hearing how divine expression has shown up in each of our thoughts and each of our experiences is just the best for me. So, getting through some announcements. So at 11 o'clock, join us for Jerry Stefaniak. His title today is The Best Times to Use the F Word. And then everyone is invited to stay after the service for carols, cookies, cocoa, and they added chili. So they've got regular and vegetarian chili with all the toppings. Mark Mullenberg, Tiffany Loosefelt have been working very hard to get things ready. So we'll eat and then gather in the sanctuary to sing some Christmas carols because it is 13 degrees outside and we're not going to sing around the fire pit and do that. Everyone's welcome to join for meditation on Sundays at 6 p.m. Mark Mullenbrock is going to be on our platform next Sunday for the celebration service. Mark and his wife Tiffany are lifelong students of Christian Science. They moved to Springfield in February and have been attending here since. Mark previously participated in Unity of Phoenix and Unity of the White Mountains in Arizona. Next Sunday, our 9:15 New Thought Adult Education class will be our very own Wendy Frederickson talking about back to basics. You can join in person or watch on the live stream. We are 4 weeks into the HVAC donation challenge, and we are over halfway there. We do have donors who are willing to match up to $5,000 collected toward the new youth wing HVAC system. You can stop by the table just outside of the sanctuary to see how much has been collected so far. The Unity Real Estate Forum is meeting every month on the third Tuesday at 6 p.m., and they will be gathering this Tuesday. It says whether you're brand new to real estate or already have experience, this forum offers a welcoming space to learn, share insights, and connect with others. The Sister Circle is an established group that's been meeting in the community, and they're going to start meeting at the church starting this Wednesday from 7 to 9 p.m. All women are welcome to attend, and they will meet every Wednesday, excluding Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve. This is a safe, intentional space for connection, personal mastery, and conscious growth. Reach out to Rachel Lee if you have any additional questions. Then our candlelight service is this Friday, December 19th. This is a beautiful service. It's at 7 p.m. Beautiful service with a wonderful message and amazing music that you won't want to miss. We have a 12 hours theme this year, so check that out. At Christmas Day at noon, we're going to do Christmas potluck, so bring a friend and your favorite holiday dish. And then mark your calendars as we have two of our cherished annual traditions coming up. Our Burning Bowl ceremony is on Sunday, December 28th, and our White Stone ceremony will be on Sunday, January 4th. Both of those will take place during the regular celebration service. And then in January, we will be electing 4 new board members. So if you have been an active member at this church for at least 1 year and are interested in being on the board, please pick up an application in the office. Those applications are due by January 14th. All right, and that will find us at completion.